just give you a perfect example. You could hate Bill Clinton, but if he would walk into a room, he would grab your hand and look into your eyes, and you think he's looking into your soul. Well, he's really looking at the girl behind you. But he would be convinced that he loves you. So there's an element of yes, there are certain people that have a talent, but that's all personality driven, and that's not to be learned. But I think communication is, and you have to be careful with this, because communication is multiple different things. Communication that is me working a room of 10 people to win them over to me or to my opinions. And then there's talking to millions of people, and they're entirely different. So there's different levels of it. But fundamentally, all communication comes down to three things. If you really, if you want to have a sort of a structure, a superstructure of all communication is the narrative telling. It's an introduction, it's a problem, and a solution. If you really want to say what is it that you're about, first you say who you are, where you come from, whether you're a company, an individual, a political party. Then you outline whatever you think is the issue or the problem, whether it's corporate, whether it's political. And lastly, the solution, which if you are advocating for yourself, it's almost always you. So if you can essentially write any piece of communication that's ever been written, is that. It's an introduction, it's a problem or solution. So you can structure any letter like that, you can structure any phone rap when you're calling voters or you're trying to sell something. That's all it is. So everything becomes different variations of introduction, problem, solution. And some of the greatest political lines in history somewhat mirror that. I mean, probably the most successful slogan of the last 150 years, land, peace, and bread. Lenin's line during the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, why is it brilliant? Is because communication is brilliant is when everyone from the billionaire to the person who cleans houses understands what it means. You don't have to be an intellectual to know what land, peace, and bread means. And the beauty of it is it means completely different things to completely different people. Or recently, like for example, in the United States will be Black Lives Matter. It's brilliant. Everyone knows what that means. The principles of it are the same. It's just different ways of outlining a introduction, problem, solution.
That's beautiful. And I think there's research on what you're pointing to as well. So Malcolm Gladwell coined this term called stickiness, like sticky messages, which don't even have to be through like urban myths, and they get circulated. So there's this beautiful book called Why Some Ideas Die While Others Survive, which speaks about what makes a message sticky. And one of them is simplicity. Just it's simple, it's easily repeatable.
Well, I mean, you use the magic phrase, because in communication, simplicity is your friend. Complexity is your enemy. Almost when you come to mass communication, everything is about simplify, repeat, simplify, repeat, simplify, repeat. That's all you do. And complicated narratives. That's one of the reasons, by the way, where academics do so poorly in political life.
Right.
Because some of the worst clients I've ever had, well, I should say some of the biggest difficult clients I've ever had are academics, because they think everyone wants to know the details of everything, and people are not interested in that. So simplicity, the clearest, simplest terms you can explain things, the economy of words, and it's also a function of modern media as attention spans. One of the reasons it's important is if you actually look at, I can tell you, this is my experience in the United States. When I started, you essentially had 15 to 20 seconds to say what you were going to say. Now you have 5 to 7 seconds.
Yeah.
So unless you can say everything you're gonna say in 5 to 7 seconds, it's too late. Because the attention spans gets less and less and less and less. So it all becomes more simple, some ways more stupid, but that's just the nature of modern communication.
That's beautiful. And what one term that speaks to the heart of what is pointed to is the curse of knowledge, which is once you know something, it's hard for you to imagine how it must feel not to know it. And academics kind of become a victim of that. They communicate not thinking about how it must feel not to know the complexities of the issues. So, well, let's talk a little bit about one's ability to communicate and their quality of life. Do you think that these two are inherently connected?
Well, of course, because the ability to communicate will guide how successful you'll be in life. Show me a successful person that doesn't know how to communicate. It's the rare person who's like that. It's the computer genius that invented something, or the great scientist, or the really eccentric, Henry Ford types. But generally, you cannot get anywhere in life without being able to express yourself, communicate yourself in clear terms. So it's one of the central defining features of success or lack of success. You have to be exceptionally gifted in your field to succeed without good communication skills. And sometimes, there's an element where people look down at good communication skills as it's a con. You're trying to pretend to be something that you're not. But it actually, yes, there are elements of that. So much of communication is a con. However, so much of it isn't. If you can't explain what you're doing, even if you're doing the best thing in the world, it's not particularly useful. You're not going to be effective, and people are going to know about it. So the ability to communicate is vital, and will define for most people, will define success or lack of success. Some of it, frankly, is personality driven because someone's shy, but you have to work through that. And you have to break those barriers and to be able to communicate and tell your story. And all good communication is narrative telling. This is why people think this. They think communication is actually a modern. It's a modern concept. It isn't. All of human history is narrative telling. Before we had written history, you had myths, and it's all narrative telling because you teach by narrative telling. It's primordial. It's what people did around the fire 8,000 years ago. As you told stories, some of them true, some of them not true, some of them made up. But almost all communication is storytelling, and not much more than that. What's your story? One of the most common English questions is, "What's your story?" Which is actually very accurate because it is a story.
That's beautiful. So generally speaking, what would you say is the best way to improve communication skills? And I remember, and this is maybe specific to PR, public relations specifically. Before I went to the Cronkite School, me and you talked, and you said PR can't exactly be taught; it must be kind of, you have to experience it. And then I got a job at a PR agency, and I was really glad. And I always remembered what you pointed to. How would you think? What's the best way to learn communicating?
By doing it. When I started in politics as an activist, I was not, I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't have well-connected parents who can get me internships in Washington or things like that. My first 2.5 years in politics, what I did is I went door to door talking to voters and then asking them to write checks for causes that they support. And then what I learned is if you can actually talk to random strangers who aren't interested in politics, don't want to talk about politics, and then you actually can convince them to write a check, which is the thing that they least like to do, to actually donate to a cause then at that point you can do anything. And it was the greatest experience. It's the greatest learning experience of my life, and I still use it today. I remember walking up to a house and I would know exactly who lives there based on the furniture that they would have behind their window. And you need to learn to speak to this person in their terms. And you have to do it continually during the day. So the only way to learn is actually to do it. And the harder the audience, the better. But then the other thing is it becomes, what you learn is over time, what you say gets less. It's the economy of words. When I look back, for example, my particular specialty in the United States is writing direct mail, which is, political mail that goes to people's homes. And when I look at what I used to write 25 years ago compared to what I write now, it looks like a page out of the Bible 25 years ago, and now it's 3 pictures and 4 headlines. So the more you learn, the less words you say. So that's that.
That's beautiful. I couldn't agree more. You have to learn it by doing. One of the very first jobs I had was I was a fundraiser for Amnesty in Sweden. That's when I was just learning to speak Swedish, and Swedes aren't very known to be extroverted. So I would just go and need to start conversations. And I thought it was kind of annoying. Now that I'm looking back at what I learned, it was absolutely instrumental in my career.
We started at the same place.